Officials in Kazakhstan say 38 people have been killed in the Azerbaijan Airlines plane crash near the city of Aktau.
Overseas tonight, and a Russian anti-aircraft system now suspected of causing the deadly Christmas Day plane crash in Kazakhstan.
Dramatic footage shows the plane falling towards the ground, followed by a large explosion as it hits the ground.
History has recorded several instances where military forces, either mistakenly or deliberately, shot down civilian aircraft. Each of these incidents became an international tragedy and led to a sharp escalation in tensions. One of the most notorious cases occurred on September 1, 1983, when a Soviet fighter jet shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, a Boeing 747 that had entered Soviet airspace over Sakhalin Island. All 269 people on board were killed. US President Ronald Reagan called the incident an act of barbarism. While the Soviet Union initially denied responsibility, it later admitted to downing the plane, but cynically claimed the airliner had been on a spy mission against the USSR. The event occurred at the height of the Cold War and further strained already tense US-Soviet relations. Another tragic case took place on July 17, 2014, when Malaysian Airlines Flight MH17, a Boeing 777, was shot down over Ukraine amid ongoing hostilities. The aircraft was en route from Amsterdam to Kuala Lumpur when it was hit by a Russian-made Buk surface-to-air missile system. All 298 people on board, most of them Dutch citizens, were killed. An international joint investigation team concluded that the Buk launcher had been transported from Russian territory and returned there after the attack. The global community demanded accountability. NATO Secretary General Anders Fogh Rasmussen said at the time, "I'm deeply shocked and saddened by the crash. It's vital that an international investigation be launched immediately, without any hindrance, and that those responsible are swiftly brought to justice." Eventually, in 2022 to 2023, a Dutch court convicted 3 individuals in absentia and sentenced them to life imprisonment, though Russia continues to deny involvement. Beyond these 2 incidents, there have been others. In 1988, the U.S. Navy cruiser USS Vincennes mistakenly shot down Iran Air Flight 655, an Airbus A300, after misidentifying it as a hostile aircraft. 290 people died. In 2001, during a military exercise, a Ukrainian air defense unit accidentally shot down a Russian Tu-154 passenger plane over the Black Sea, killing 78 people. And in January 2020, amid heightened tensions, Iranian forces tragically mistook Ukrainian flight PS-752 for a hostile target shortly after taking off from Tehran, killing all 176 on board. On December 25, 2024, Azerbaijan Airlines Flight J28243, Embraer 190, flying from Baku to Grozny, crashed near Aktau, Kazakhstan, while diverting to an alternate airport. A preliminary investigation in Azerbaijan concluded that the aircraft had been intercepted by a Russian Panzer S air defense system. 38 of the 67 people on board were killed. The United States and Canada confirmed they saw early indications of Russian air defense involvement, and Baku publicly demanded that Moscow admit responsibility. Each of these incidents illustrates the horrific consequences for innocent civilians and how quickly such tragedies escalate into political crises. Kaliningrad holds special significance in our scenario. A Russian exclave on the Baltic Sea coast, wedged between Poland and Lithuania, historically a fortress city formerly known as Königsberg, it's now one of the most heavily militarized regions of Russia. After the collapse of the Soviet Union, Kaliningrad became isolated from mainland Russia and surrounded by NATO countries. Under Vladimir Putin's rule, this enclave has been transformed into a true military stronghold. It hosts the headquarters of the Russian Baltic Fleet and a significant concentration of forces. The Kaliningrad region is home to powerful air defense systems, including at least 4 divisions of S-400 missile systems capable of targeting aircraft hundreds of kilometers away. Additionally, hundreds of missiles have been deployed there, from nuclear-capable Iskander ballistic missiles to Bastion coastal anti-ship complexes. A considerable ground force presence, officially 12,000 to 18,000 troops in the 11th Army Corps, though some units were redeployed to the war in Ukraine, is complemented by military aviation, Su-24 attack aircraft, Su-27, and Su-30 fighters. For Moscow, Kaliningrad is an unsinkable aircraft carrier and a launchpad for projecting power in the Baltic region. The weaponry station there creates an anti-access aerial denial, A2AD zone that, in the event of conflict, could block air and sea routes to the Baltic states. Lithuania's Ministry of Defense describes Kaliningrad as the greatest threat in the region. Poland is also concerned. Kaliningrad lies just about 300 kilometers from Warsaw, and Russian missiles stationed there could strike both Warsaw and Berlin. In response, the Polish militaries deployed HIMARS rocket systems near the border to ensure readiness to strike back if tensions escalate. Because of this concentration of forces, Kaliningrad is often seen as a prime target for NATO in the event of direct confrontation. It's believed that in case of war, the alliance would try to neutralize this bastion as quickly as possible to secure its eastern flank. Some analysts suggest that in response to Russian aggression, Kaliningrad could become the Kremlin's Achilles heel, as it is cut off from the main body of Russian forces and surrounded on all sides by NATO members. However, this calculation is complicated by the nuclear factor. According to Western intelligence estimates, Russia has long stationed tactical nuclear weapons in Kaliningrad. Moreover, Russian military doctrine allows for the use of nuclear weapons to defend the country's territorial integrity. As analysts note, the specter of nuclear use to defend Kaliningrad could deter any large-scale Western operations against the enclave. Thus, a strike on Kaliningrad would be an extremely risky move, one that Moscow could interpret as an existential threat. The downing of a civilian aircraft in our time is especially dangerous against the backdrop of already heightened tensions between Russia and the West. Since Russia's full-scale invasion of Ukraine in 2022, NATO has significantly reinforced the defense of its eastern flank. Additional allied contingents, advanced equipment, and air defense systems have been deployed to Eastern Europe. US President Joe Biden emphasized that the United States and its allies will defend every inch of NATO territory. Although the return of Donald Trump to power casts uncertainty on that assurance. Multinational NATO battle groups are now stationed in the Baltic states and Poland, and military exercises are conducted regularly. In response, Russia continues to test the limits, including frequent aircraft interceptions in the Baltic region. In February 2023, Dutch F-35 fighters intercepted a group of Russian aircraft over Poland that had taken off from Kaliningrad. In April 2023, British and German Typhoon jets scrambled to intercept Russian planes near the Baltic borders. Such incidents are occurring more frequently, each carrying the risk of miscalculation. One of the most alarming incidents occurred on September 29, 2022, over the Black Sea near Russian-occupied Crimea. A Russian Su-27 fighter opened fire on a British RC-135 reconnaissance aircraft that was conducting a patrol mission in international airspace. The Kremlin claimed it was due to a technical malfunction, and the British aircraft miraculously avoided damage. In September 2023, there was an intelligence leak regarding the obedient Su-27 pilot. The BBC obtained intercepted communications confirming that, during the September 29, 2022 incident, the Russian pilot deliberately launched 2 missiles at the British RC-135, believing the phrase "you have the target" was a green light to open fire. Only the malfunction of the second missile saved the plane, and its crew of 30 from destruction, narrowly averting a direct war between Russia and NATO. Unfortunately, this was only the beginning of a dangerous escalation in the skies over the Black Sea. March 14, 2023, the strike on a US MQ-9 Reaper. 2 Russian Su-27s harassed the drone for over 40 minutes, dumping jet fuel on it and cutting across its path aggressively, until one of the fighters struck the Reaper's propeller. The drone crashed into the sea, and Washington summoned the Russian ambassador in protest. This marked the first direct US-Russian Air Force incident in decades that could have resulted in loss of life had it involved a manned aircraft. 2024. Dangerous encounters become routine. According to open-source flight trackers and NATO press briefings, the number of unsafe and unprofessional intercepts over the Black and Barents Seas nearly doubled compared to 2022. Russian Su-30s and Su-35s routinely pass within 5 to 10 meters of US P-8A or French Atlantique II aircraft, occasionally dropping flares directly in their path. The Kremlin's testing the limits of patience while playing roulette with World War III, remarked General Todd Walters, former commander of US Air Forces in Europe. Regular NATO reconnaissance flights near Russian borders, combined with Russia's aggressive intercepts, form a volatile mix. NATO experts note that Russian pilots often behave recklessly, executing provocative maneuvers under orders from the Kremlin. Should another civilian airliner be shot down by Russian forces, the world's reaction would be immediate and harsh. The UN Security Council would likely convene an emergency meeting, as it did following the MH17 disaster. Resolutions would be passed demanding a full and independent investigation into the causes of the tragedy, unfettered access for international experts to the crash site, and accountability for those responsible. Western nations would undoubtedly condemn Russia's actions in the strongest possible terms. For instance, the North Atlantic Council would likely issue a statement similar to the one following Syria's downing of a Turkish jet in 2012. We consider this act unacceptable and condemn it in the strongest terms, emphasizing the disregard for human life and the norms of international security. Undoubtedly, the country whose aircraft or citizens are harmed will demand justice. If the downed aircraft belong to a NATO member state, or even if many of the passengers were citizens of NATO countries, this automatically raises the issue of collective defense. According to Article 4 of the North Atlantic Treaty, allies consult together whenever, in the opinion of any of them, the security or territorial integrity of a member is threatened. It's likely, therefore, that the affected country would immediately initiate consultations under Article 4. For example, in June 2012, Turkey did exactly that after its military aircraft was shot down by Syrian air defenses. At that time, NATO unanimously expressed solidarity with Ankara, emphasizing that the security of the alliance is indivisible. However, consultations are only the first step. If it's reliably established that Russian forces deliberately attacked a civilian aircraft, many within NATO would regard this as an act of aggression against the alliance. This would raise the question of invoking Article 5, collective defense, which states that an armed attack against one member shall be considered an attack against all. Still, it's important to understand that triggering Article 5 is not automatic. It's a political decision taken by consensus among the allies. In reality, NATO may initially try to avoid an immediate escalation into full-scale war with Russia. One possible course of action would be to label the incident a grave war crime, impose the harshest possible sanctions, and significantly bolster military presence on NATO's eastern flank. This mirrors what happened in 2014 after the downing of MH17. Instead of launching a military response, the West imposed a wide range of sanctions on Russia and dramatically increased diplomatic and military support for Ukraine. For example, Estonia's then Prime Minister, Taavi Rõivas, stated, "We're going to increase sanctions against Russia. It's our moral duty to the victims of MH17." Most experts agree that a direct military clash between Russia and NATO remains a last resort and highly unlikely scenario, given its unpredictable and catastrophic consequences. NATO will strive to avoid war with a nuclear power at all costs, seeking alternative responses, from legal and sanctions-based mechanisms to covert operations. However, the Russian leadership could change the rules of the game at any moment. We're all witnessing Putin's ambitions to become a global ruler and reassert control over the countries that once formed the Soviet Union. Each such flight tests the boundaries, probing how the alliance will respond. If the response is not firm enough, it may be perceived as weakness. The main conclusion is that such a crisis is easier to prevent than to contain. As long as the war in Ukraine continues and general tensions remain high, the risks to civilian aviation near conflict zones are extremely elevated. The international community must pressure Russia to halt its dangerous behavior, whether it be missile launches, interceptions, or GPS signal jamming, all of which endanger innocent lives. Airlines are already being forced to reroute flights to avoid dangerous areas. The scenario of a NATO strike on Kaliningrad remains hypothetical, but if Russia initiates hostilities, it would become a primary target in NATO's defensive response.